Very pleased now to be joined here on the NFC East Mixtape by the one and only, the legendary, the internationally famous, the latest person to put up with my voice that has been battling a sickness for about a week at this point in time. You know him. I actually don't even know where you know him because you can know him from a lot of places at this point in time. We love Survivor. He loves Survivor. He is a survivor from Survivor Ghost Island, from I guess formerly the defunct, the lived, the properly realized Surviving Snyder podcast. It is Brendan Shapiro. Brendan, thank you so much for taking the time to join the mixtape.
It is a pleasure to be here. I normally don't go out of my way to talk to Cowboys fans or affiliates, but I'm happy to be talking to you today.
So my co-host Brandon and I, we love the NFC East. We love Survivor. We like to joke, but say in a totally serious way, that we came up with the term NFC Beast. It is the dumbest name of all time. I hate that people like last year was so annoying. Obviously because the Giants had their little run of success that, went way over to the top of their heads. I hate that. I hate when people talk about the NFC Beast. Do you like that term or not?
No, I'm not a fan. And I mean, if we're being honest with ourselves, I think over the last decade or so, NFC East is probably a better description of our division. But no, and the thing is, like, I mean, we can get into this, but if you look at postseason success, obviously the Eagles, took it almost all the way last year, but there's not a lot of recent history of success out of this division. So I think it's maybe a little far-fetched to call it the NFC Beast, at least not yet.
Brendan, I'm a big fan of yours, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't point out that one of the two Washington division titles in recent memory came with a below 500 record. No other, NFC East team, did that. I actually am not the biggest fan of Ron Rivera, and I think 4 coaches have done that this century, and he's done it twice. Like, that's the most incredible run of luck that anybody has ever had for somebody who's regarded to be this gambler of sorts. But again, we can get into that as well. You love the Washington Commanders. You were on Survivor, as mentioned, Survivor Ghost Island. Awesome season. I believe Wendell is an Eagles fan. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Wendell is. So I've got a couple friends. Wendell's good buddy Bryce, also an Eagles fan. So most Eagles, I will go on record as saying Eagles fans are among the most deplorable people on the face of the earth.
With you there.
Having said that, I do know a handful of really cool guys and people that root for the team. A brother-in-law of mine, one of my best friends, Wendell, Bryce, all these guys. So there are exceptions to the rule, but yeah, it's a tough bunch by and large. For forever, when I was a kid, everybody talked about the then Redskins Cowboys rivalry. And I hated the Cowboys because I was supposed to, but really, if I'm being honest with you, I've always hated the Eagles more, and mostly it's because of my experiences at what was RFK and then FedEx Field. Nobody wants to fight like an Eagles fan wants to fight. Nobody wants to curse in the while spilling beer on your kids like an Eagles fan does. Well, maybe the Giants fans are close behind. The Dallas fans, to be honest with you, they tend to be just kind of having a good time, happy go lucky. Yeah, well, yeah, and they'll talk a lot of smack, but it's usually pretty good natured. They don't have their fists up. They just like to have some fun.
Yeah, I recently for SB Nation, I interviewed Victor Cruz, and I asked him, when he was playing, obviously he won the Super Bowl as well. We don't have to talk about that. But I said, where did you hate going the most? What was the most unpleasant experience for you? And he said Philly. And I thought it was going to be kind of what you were saying. And he talked about the old prison under the stadium at the vet, whatever. But his reasoning was logical, but really weird. He was like, we had to take a train there. And I was just like, okay, that's kind of a strange reason to hate this. He was like, I like, these are my words. He's like, I like a more posh lifestyle. So I can imagine, visiting AT&T Stadium was a little bit more fun of an experience in that sense. And to your point, I can't name a loss the Cowboys have had to Washington that I've been morose about. You know what I mean? There have been some that have bothered me. And I can't even think of a win where I've just been soaking it all in. I suppose maybe the penultimate week of 2013 when Tony Romo hit DeMarco Murray. But I mean, it's just they've been so down on their luck that it isn't so much of a rivalry in some respects. So I kind of get, resorting to emotional things the way the Eagles do, obviously.
Yeah. I think I'm a little bit older than you are, so I can remember some really, really high stakes wins and losses for that matter in the Cowboys rivalry. But yeah, in recent times, we haven't seen that much. Back in 2012, I was at FedEx Field when the
Week 17.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. When Washington won to punch their ticket and to knock Dallas out of the playoffs, that was a big one. FedEx Field is a dreadful stadium. It's a dump. But I don't think I've seen it rocking like it was that night. That was a great atmosphere, and you don't see a ton of great atmospheres, frankly, at FedEx. So that was a lot of fun. There've been some sort of entertaining Thanksgiving games, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in a week and a half. I think probably it's not where Washington's probably not coming out on the good end of this one, but you never know when these two teams get together.
You mentioned obviously Dallas hosts Washington on Thanksgiving this year. Earlier that season in 2012 was the RG3. People remember it as the RG3 game, but Alfred Morris had a day himself. And Tony Romo and Des Bryant. I mean, I think I had Romo and Des on my fantasy team that day, and it was just, if you had a piece of that game, it was a prosperous week for you. 2020 they met on Thanksgiving. And that obviously led to Washington winning the title. That was the horrible fake punt that the Cowboys had, like when they were just like, they were super down. It was a really tough scene. That was, I don't know if you know this. I know the Commanders just traded away Chase Young. The Cowboys never beat Chase Young on the Commanders. That never happened. He was 2-0 against them.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a causation or correlation, but yeah, we'll give Chase Young credit for that.
So I mentioned you had the podcast, Surviving Snyder, because it's past tense. You, Rick Devens, former mixtaper, Dalton Ross, who's been on the Blog on the Boys podcast to talk Cowboys, Commanders, et cetera, et cetera. You guys all have, I don't know that we can say Dalton is a survivor, all due respect, but you know what I mean? Like, all have this connection to Survivor, and all liked Washington. Like, what you just were like, hey, let's just turn the microphones on and talk about this team. And the name was so perfect because if there was one thing that the entire NFC East could unite under, it was Dan Snyder being awful. We actually were really bummed when he sold the team. Obviously, he's a horrible human being, and nobody wants to advocate for that. But selling the team improves the team, and we don't want to see that happen around here. We wanted them to be terrible forever.
Yeah. The origin of our podcast was we just had a text group going, and it was Rick and Dalton. For those who don't know Dalton, he is the sort of the preeminent expert, and he is the preeminent writer of Survivor. So from the very beginning of the show back in 2000, he is editor of EW magazine. Now it's online, but and he covered Survivor. He's been out on location a million times, and so there is nobody on earth that knows more about the show than he does. And so anyway, he's a Washington guy. As a matter of fact, when I went out to go play Survivor, we had this like press junket kind of before we played. And I knew Dalton was a then Redskins guy, Washington football fan, because I read his stuff, and he'd mention it like in his recaps and stuff, which I thought was so cool. So for me, I was starstruck when I got to meet him like before the game, and I walked up, shook his hand, and the first words he uttered to me were "Hail the Redskins." I was like, "Oh, this is my guy," right? So, and then my Survivor experience all went downhill from there. But no, it was so. We were connected through Survivor, and then I didn't play with Rick. He was on a different season, but Dalton connected us, and we had a podcast, we had a text chain that we called Misery Loves Company. And then one day Dalton was like, "Hey, why don't we turn this into a podcast?" And both of those guys have a ton of experience talking into mics, and so I was like, "Man, I'll be the guy that you can drag along. That's fine with me." So it was fun, man. We did it for I've sort of lost track. It was like 130 episodes, something like that. And we took it all the way to when Snyder sold the team, and we felt like the job was done. And yeah, we survived. So, and yeah, I mean, talking about where we are now, look, I can't tell you that Josh Harris is the greatest owner in the NFL. I think what I can tell you is this: he's better than the worst owner in the NFL. You can't get worse than Dan Snyder. It was just hard, man. Like, irrespective of the results on the field, it was just so hard to root for this team. That was just an embarrassment. It was an embarrassment in our city, but like nationally, it was just a train wreck in every way possible. So, I mean, we couldn't have been more excited. The two most excited times I've had in my entire adult life as a sports fan. One, when Joe Gibbs came out of retirement to coach the team. I grew up in Joe Gibbs, the first era, right?
Sure.
Like, I grew up watching Super Bowls, and so when he came back out, I mean, he's just a huge hero for me. And then the other was when the day we knew that it was official, that Snyder really was going to sell. Those are the two happiest days of my adult life as a sports fan.
Yeah, the Joe Gibbs thing, like people look back, like I just did and laugh, but like if you were a fan of the team, that had to have been like the coolest possible thing in the world.
Oh,
Like
it was.
I don't remember at what point, but when the Cowboys had a coaching vacancy, I remember talking to my dad. He was like, they should call Jimmy Johnson up. And like it would actually be that. Like it would actually be like that
Yeah,
living itself out
that
and
was
being
incredible.
realized.
And the reality is, like, look, I know that Gibbs had lost a little bit off his fastball at that point, but this is a dude that took the team in 4 years, took the team to the playoffs twice, right? No other coach can
Right.
say that. No other coach had that level of success. And I know it's middling success, but I mean, under Snyder, that is like, I mean, that's nobody's matched that level of success that he had. And I think he was fighting an uphill battle, as every coach has been under Snyder. So I enjoyed it. I know he didn't bring the team back to glory. That they didn't get back to the Super Bowl under Gibbs, but that was a shining light in a pretty dark quarter century that we've had under Dan Snyder.
You mentioned Josh Harris, and my co-host Brandon is a Philly guy through and through.
Yeah.
And he is really bothered as a Sixers fan that Josh Harris now has a kind of a stake in a Philadelphia rival, so to speak. I think that's really dumb. Does it bother? I mean, I don't know if you hate the Sixers or whatever. If that like does that bother you at all that he's got his hand in I guess rivalry sort of cookie jars?
No, not really. I mean, yeah, the cross sport thing doesn't really get to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm not too consistent with that. Like, I like Washington guys to stay. So I think it would bother me more maybe if it had gone the other way, right? Like if he had been a Washington sports owner, and then went and bought a Philly team, I guess I could kind of imagine how that might bother me a little bit. But no, as a Washington fan, it doesn't bother me even a little bit. And I think in part because, again, it's like he's our savior, right? Like anybody but the guy we had is an improvement. So I'm not about to sit back and be critical of Josh Harris. And you can hear Philly people talk about the fact that they have a lot of confidence in Harris, and some people think he hasn't done the greatest job, either as a hockey owner or a basketball owner. I think probably when it all shakes out, he's going to be kind of an average owner. If they did wins above replacement, maybe he's like a zero WAR guy,
Yeah.
right? He's not a negative WAR guy. He's just kind of run of the mill. But hey, again, we'll take it. Anything's better than what we had.
But if you're a zero WAR guy at that point, like in a league that rewards parity, like eventually fate smiles upon you, like to the point that you're a playoff team. And like, if you get in, like you just literally never know what can possibly happen. And so that's why, again, like this season hasn't gone incredibly well. I'm certainly interested to get your thoughts on the current Commanders. But there's so many moving parts. There's the pending potential rebrand and the Ron Rivera situation and the quarterback situation. Like it's just impossible to like accelerate everything and have everything. You're not going to feel the way you felt when Joe Gibbs came out of retirement in the next 5 years. Like it's a process, and everyone has to understand that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think speaking about Rivera, when they hired him, I thought, okay, he's probably a zero WAR guy, right? And I've become convinced over the years that he's something less than that. Unfortunately, look, you got to give him credit. He came in under very difficult circumstances, and he's a professional, and
great human being. Like nobody denies that. Totally with you.
He's just not a very good professional, right? So like he's a below average professional. I mean, he's a guy that's had 2 or 3 winning seasons out of, after this year when they failed to have a winning season this year. I think it's like 2 or 3 out of 13 seasons he's had a winning season. And that's, that's what it looks like on the field. He farms out the defense to Del Rio. He farms out the offense to Bieniemy. So, I mean, for all intents and purposes, his job is to manage the show. And on game day, he's the one making decisions. He's the one, making that 4th and 2 decision. He's the one deciding whether to go for 2 at the end of the game. He's the one who is calling timeouts or not calling timeouts, or challenging or not challenging. And he's terrible at all of those things. I mean, really, really bad. And so again, great guy, good human being. I think the players like playing for him, and there's something to be said for that, but he's not good at coaching football. And so I'm really excited to see what comes next. And I'm never I feel bad. Like I don't root for people to get fired. And I'm definitely, generally speaking, not a midseason replacement proponent, right? Like there's usually very little that can be gained from that. This might be the exception though. This year and this team might be the exception, because I was listening to you last week, and you guys were talking about Howell, and it sounds like you don't have a ton of confidence. And I'll say this, like, I know that 6 or 8 games or 10 games don't make a career. And there's been some bad this season, but this is a guy who's started now, I think, 11 games in his career. And I think there's been more good than bad. And you see the upside, the upside's there. Now, I know, I mean, look, I'm in Washington. I know that you can have a fool's gold season, right? Like, you can have a one-hit wonder. Robert Griffin played right here in Washington. And so, and obviously he wasn't what we all hoped he would be after his first season. And so I don't think we've seen enough to say that Sam Howell's the guy for sure. But I also think that we've seen enough to say he might be the guy, right? And that's the first time I've said that about anybody since Kirk Cousins. I know Kirk Cousins is a lightning rod. I think he's a lot better than a lot of other people do. But he's, in my opinion, he's got the potential to be the best quarterback since Kirk Cousins, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And so that's a big deal. And if he's that guy, what concerns me, and I was talking with Dalton about this the other day, like, what concerns me is, I don't really want this guy who's learning to play the position and seeming to sort of gain steam as he goes. I mean, his last 3 games have been really good. He just seems like he's on a good trajectory. I'd hate to see him have to start over with a new OC, right? So what I'd like to see, and you have to think that if Josh Harris decides to replace Ron Rivera, whoever comes in is going to want to blow the whole staff out and bring in their own people. So I think the responsible play here, if you're Josh Harris, is to let Rivera go immediately, install Bieniemy as the head, and just see what that looks like. And maybe it's a disaster, but they're not going anywhere anyway, right? So, like, we might as well figure it out and see what you've got in Bieniemy, because I think probably the only way that the Howell Bieniemy experience or experiment continues is if Bieniemy is the head coach, because I just don't see a scenario where they're going to bring in a new head coach and keep the OC.
I think I agree with most of what you said. I want to say I'm a big Kirk Cousins fan, and I've gone to bat for Kirk a lot. And so, I've got the scars to prove it. And so it's just super huge bummer, obviously, what happened to him.
Yeah.
Going to be really fascinating to see what happens to him in free agency, obviously. I totally agree with you. One of the worst parts about my job is, like, highlighting when people suck or are bad at what they do, and, like, calling for them to be fired or benched or whatever the case may be. And I'm kind of with you in that, like, the Commanders aren't making the playoffs, right? Like, I know that they could, sneak in as the 7th
or if
seed.
they do, who cares? Yeah,
right, exactly. If you're the 7th seed at this point, you're going to Detroit. Like, is that like a fun,
right.
weekend? Is that totally worth it? And so I agree with you that you have, like, the Eric Bieniemy thing is really unique, obviously, and there's certainly a large amount of data to suggest that he should have had a head coaching job by this point. You have to find out. Like, you didn't bring him in here just to not figure that answer out. So you've got, approximately half a season at this point in time to figure it out. And yeah, like, if you're gonna ever give Sam Howell a chance with him, this is it. Like, treat it like your focus group. I'm totally with you, because I mean, like, whether you believe that Josh Harris wants to get his own, like, figurehead in or whatever the case may be, beyond all that, it's just kind of time to move on from Ron Rivera. Like, it's been 4 years. There's no, like, quantifiable difference that he really makes with the team. So, like, you've got that box checked off, so to speak. Bieniemy makes sense to give an opportunity to. That makes sense. He's obviously improved, or we've seen improvement from Sam Howell. I'm a little bit, I'm not quite ready to make a decision, but I guess if I'm a juror, I'm out right now. I'm with you. Like, I think the worst possible thing is the fool's gold is if you pass up on an opportunity to improve somewhere because you talk yourself into this, that, or the other. But the reality too is, at this point, even the Commanders probably have too many wins to be in Caleb Williams or Drake May striking distance.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Do you want to bring Kirk back in free agency? You don't want to do the, like, I don't know, somebody's going to talk themselves into, like, Andy Dalton or Jacoby Brissett. I mean, ironically enough, you don't want to do that. So, like, at this point, while the franchise is still kind of being reborn, it makes sense to lean into Sam Howell. He's on a super cheap rookie contract. Like, all of that makes sense. So I'm kind of with you. Like, maybe you're one, maybe Brendan, maybe the Cowboys blow out the Commanders on Thanksgiving, and the week and a half gives Washington enough time to move Ron Rivera out and let Eric Bieniemy come in for the rest of December.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I think that probably Rivera is sticking around through the end of the season, because I think Harris doesn't want to act rash or be perceived as somebody who's acting in a way that's rash. But I think one thing that would do it is if they lose to the Giants this weekend, because the Giants are so bad, and because it would mean a few things. It would mean that they've lost to the Giants for the second time this season.
Right.
I mean, the Giants are really dreadful, really, really bad. And Washington lost lost badly to the Giants, right? They looked hapless. And so if they do that again at home this week to a Giants team that, Tommy DeVito.
This isn't even the Giants. If you lose to the Tommy DeVito Giants, like it's a whole different level of shame.
They're so awful. I think particularly because Daniel Jones and Darren Waller are out, I don't think there's a worse group of skill players in the NFL, except maybe in New England,
right?
Than with the Giants right now. I mean, they're awful, like really, really awful. So if Washington goes or loses to the Giants at home this week, maybe that would do it. But I think short of that, Rivera's with us for the end of the season. I think, if I had to guess. And that's too bad. And you talked about it last week on your show. I mean, they're stuck in purgatory, and this is what happens, right? Every year, it's like, okay, cool, we won 7 games, we got the 15th pick in the draft. Like, what are you going to do with that? And so, I find myself in this weird, like, okay, intellectually, I look at it and say, all right, here's what I want to happen. The best case scenario is that Washington loses narrowly and Sam Howell balls out, right? Every week.
So last week was great for you.
Yeah. So that at the end of the season, Washington has 4 wins and they're picking 3rd and they are convinced that Sam Howell is the guy, right? That would be probably the best case scenario. Having said that, I go into each game thinking that, and then I'm watching the game and I can't help but root for a win. I just can't root for a loss. So I don't. But then I guess that's like the consolation or the silver lining when when I'm like drowning myself in my tears and beer at the end of the night is like, well, at least, at least they're not going to have the 20th pick in the draft. But yeah, I don't know what the fix is. And so I think the stakes are so high with Howell because you said it, that, they're not going to be in a position and they've got a handful more of draft picks than they had, but it's going to take so much to go up and get Caleb Williams or Drake May or one of these guys that I just don't think they'll have it in them to do it. So yeah, I'm just praying that Howell is the guy.
I mean, Sam Howell, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson. Terry McLaurin's always been the like underrated guy, like the poster for that. Jahan Dotson's now kind of in that category himself. Brian Robinson isn't bad. And the fact that, the organization traded away both Chase Young and Montez Sweat, really smart. Like, not a lot of teams would be that bold. But again, like when you're at the bottom, like you have nowhere else to go. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that was really wise to move on from 2 dudes who you probably weren't going to bring back. And you got something out of Chase Young when I would imagine in July. That seemed impossible, going into the contract year.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, they didn't, the reporting is they didn't want to get rid of Sweat, but the offer was too good. And when you look at it, Sweat just got $25 million, right? So that was going to be the asking price. And I think the team really valued Sweat, but having already paid Deron Payne and John Allen $20 million plus per year, I just think they looked at it and they said, we can't pay this. This guy's worth a lot to us, but he's not worth $25 million a year, right? That's like Myles Garrett money, right? So he's not Myles Garrett. He's a good player, like a really solid player. He's not a game wrecker. And so I think they just felt like they had to, it was the right thing for them to do. And the reality is, I think of it this way. If you could have Montez Sweat for $25 million, or you could have somebody who's maybe half the player Sweat is for 1/10 the money, for $2.5 million, I think you got to go that way, right? I just think you do. So yeah, they were looking at the future, and it's something that the team really hasn't done in the past decade or so. They were short-sighted and vindictive, and so they let Kirk Cousins go for nothing. Right. They let Trent Williams go for essentially nothing. And so it's about time that they start being forward-looking, and so I applaud the moves.
I think that's like every fan, like whenever a team cuts a player, they're like, you couldn't even get like a 7th-round draft pick for him. We're actually talking on the day that the Dolphins got rid of Kelvin Joseph, who the Cowboys traded for Noah Igbenogany. It's like, well, you got Noah Igbenogany for a dude that the Dolphins cut before Thanksgiving. You know what I mean? Like, it worked out. Yeah. And to your point about Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne, I have never entered a Cowboys Commanders game. And I say this contextually, like, been worried about Chase Young, despite the fact the Cowboys never beat a Commanders team with him, but never been like, oh man, this is going to be like a Chase Young, Montez Sweat game. But Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, those are constantly problems for Dak Prescott and for the Cowboys. So, and something that Brandon says a lot around here, the Montez Sweat contract you talked about doesn't fit the timeline that the organization is on. You know what I mean? Right. Like, he doesn't fit the pace that this organization is moving with because of the potential new head coach, whether it's Eric Bieniemy or somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And so, they picked up a 2nd rounder for Sweat. It's the Chicago 2nd rounder, so it should be the top of the draft, top of the 2nd round. They picked up an extra third rounder. It's going to be the end of the third round for all intents and purposes, an extra fourth rounder for Chase Young. But my big hope is that they invest heavily, and they have a ton of money to spend in free agency. I think they have as much money as almost anybody in the league in free agency. It's not the most loaded
quarterback contract too,
and a cheap quarterback contract.
Right,
exactly. So my big hope is that, I mean, as we've talked about, the most glorious thing would be if Sam Howell really turns out to be a guy. And I'll say this about Sam Howell: I don't think, watching him now, I don't think that his upside is he's a top 3. He's never going to be Mahomes, Rodgers type of, ceiling player.
Sure. What a crime.
But I think he could be a top 10 guy, right? And a top 10 guy, you could do a lot worse than that, right? And we've been doing a lot worse than that for a long time here in Washington. So I mean, if he could be you can win a Super Bowl with a top 10 guy, right? You can't win one with a bottom half guy. That not anymore. Like Trent Dilfer's never going to happen again, I don't think. But you can win one with a top 10 guy. And so that's my big hope. And if that's what he is, you got 2 more years after this one with him on a rookie deal. You bring in some free agents, you front load those contracts while you're not paying anything for your quarterback. And then they've got some draft stock. So my hope is, I mean, they've got to revamp the offensive line. I think they can do some things to improve their team. And hopefully the fact that they've got this cash and the draft stock means that they can attract a bona fide GM and a bona fide coach in the offseason.
Well, I know we have a lot of younger listeners and viewers, but like this is a Tiffany brand franchise of the NFL. Like I know it's different and the name is different, but like you're talking about a massive media market, obviously the nation's capital. These are historic roots. This is like truly like whatever your favorite like home garden television show is. Like the bones of this house are pristine. It just, you got to have the like demo day and everything to kind of like give it a facelift. So the last thing on the Commanders for me is, you mentioned that we talked about how they're in purgatory. Wherever they are, like along that spectrum, they're still better off than the Giants, because a worse place than purgatory to be is in purgatory while thinking you're past that. And that was the crime or the penalty of like over delivering in year 1 of the rebuild for the Giants, is they thought that they were way too far along down that road. And now and plus like the injuries and things like that obviously exacerbate the issue. But like that Tiffany brand franchise is down historically bad right now.
Yeah. And they had that blip last year. You said it, like, and I think that was maybe the worst thing for them. It inspired them to sign Daniel Jones to a big deal. And I mean, I guess the good news for the Giants is they got 1 more year on that deal and they can get out of it. And so if they're in a position, as they likely will be, to draft one of these quarterbacks, you can pay Daniel Jones the $30 million or whatever he makes, to be a backup to a rookie who's making rookie money, right? So
like you did with Eli and Daniel Jones.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I guess that's, if there's any upside or any sort of, I don't know, like silver lining for Giants fans, it's that they may be in a position to improve their team at the most important position. When they thought they had the answer a year ago, they thought, oh, maybe we have the guy. And I think probably Giants fans, if they were being honest, last year would have said, yeah, he's never going to be Pat Mahomes, but like he could be a top 10 guy. He's there. They were saying about him what I'm now saying about Sam Howell, which is kind of funny, but
you're not going to give Sam Howell $40 million this offseason. That's the,
exactly.
And exactly. I didn't blame them for that. They were stuck. Like they were stuck because they over delivered in year 1. And so like, how could you let the quarterback walk? It was a no-win situation. And to be fair though, they did play the Saquon thing right. They never blinked, obviously, when he wanted big money, and they'll be able to walk away from him, obviously, this offseason, and probably still get a comp pick as a result of it.
Yeah. But they're in a bad way. And so I'm really interested though to see how things pan out for the Eagles and the Cowboys, because the Cowboys, I mean, it's seemingly every year they're just so loaded. I think Jerry Jones has got to be confounding for you and Cowboys fans, because on the one hand, it's like, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think some Cowboys fans look at Jones and like, all right, I wish he weren't so meddlesome. He's got his hands in this thing too much. On the other hand, man, they can acquire talent. They can draft. Like they draft dudes all the time. Like and that's, I know Jones has got a big hand in that, right? So I don't know. I guess you've got to feel conflicted, but it seems like every year you look at the Cowboys and you're like, they have so many, they're just loaded. Like they have so many guys, and every year, it's just seems to fall apart. And so I don't know. What do you think as a Cowboys fan and somebody who is thinking about the team constantly. I mean, is this year how is this year any different from any of the last 10 years? Like, it just seems like it's a record on repeat at this point.
Well, you segued us into the Cowboys-Eagles conversation. That's what I was going to do next. And obviously this division and arguably the NFC is going to come down to one of two of them. It'll be interesting. The Cowboys play the Lions in week 17, so that'll kind of add to the mix of it all. You're right. Like, it is something I say often is like, you will never do your Christmas shopping with them mathematically eliminated. Like, that will never happen. Like, they will never be that out. To your credit, the Cowboys draft extraordinarily well. Will McClay, every year they like add something to his job title to just give him a promotion to keep him around. He kind of heads all that, and so that's why they've certainly earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to something like this past year when people were a little bit down on the Mozzie Smith pick. But you're right, like like Deron Bland is balling out of his mind right now, 5th round pick last year.
Yeah.
And where things are different, and it's difficult. And I don't mean to be like the woe is me Cowboys person, but like, because they are who they are and they have the, reputation and the attention that they do, if they don't win the Super Bowl, they're not just like a bad team. They're like galactic failures. You know what I mean? And so heavy truly is the head that wears their particular crown. And so I mentioned I have fought a lot for Kirk Cousins. I fight a lot on behalf of Mike McCarthy. Last year, I don't know if you're aware of this, the Cowboys went to the playoffs for 2 straight years for the first time since 2006 and 2007. Like, that had never, like, and I recognize like how silly that is to be like, what an amazing accomplishment. But like, that was not happening for a very long time with the Cowboys. They won double-digit games last year in consecutive seasons for the first time since 1995 and 1996. Do you know, Brendan, that last year was their first road playoff win since the 1992 NFC Championship game when they first knocked off the Niners? Like, it had been, and some of that is like circumstance, right? Like, they had home field advantage a lot, whatever. But they still lost in the divisional round, right? Like, so like, you can do all these amazing things and you can, blow the cobwebs off of all these like particular record books and stat sheets. But like, if you can't get to the NFC Championship game, it's still kind of the same conversation. And so they have become a team under Mike McCarthy that kicks the crap out of bad teams, that responds well after losses. They are 11-1 after losses since 2021. Obviously, 2020 was the year Dak was hurt. They have become a team that defends home field. I mean, like, have you ever been like, oh man, I'm scared of going to AT&T Stadium? No, like, to Victor Cruz's point, it was like a posh palace, but they've won 12 games in a row there. So like, they're becoming what Mike McCarthy's Packers were. And I know that they really under-delivered for a lot of people, but if you are in the tournament every year, again, I kind of go back to what I told you earlier. I think that eventually the odds are that you'll get lucky or that the ball will break your way or whatever the case may be. So I don't know. I mean, like, if they probably won't win the Super Bowl, right? Like, if you had to take one team or the field, it's easier to take the field. But they're as consistently good as they have been since the 90s, which again isn't saying much, but is a really big deal for this particular team. I don't know if that makes sense to you, though.
Yeah, it does. I'm curious to get your opinion on, we talked about wins above replacement for Ron Rivera. And what do you think about McCarthy? You said you're a big McCarthy defender. Is he, I mean, clearly you think he's not a liability for the team. Do you think he's an asset, or is he just kind of like gonna, deliver on what he should, or is he giving you positive wins above replacement?
I think he definitely is. I mean, I think his greatest crime in his NFL career is that he lost a PR battle to Aaron Rodgers, and that forever, handicapped him in any kind of evaluation or assessment that anybody makes of him. I mean, like, people fell all over themselves at the idea of Sean Payton when they're like the same coach. You know what I mean?
Right.
And Mike McCarthy never, Sean Payton went 7-9 3 years in a row with Drew Brees as his quarterback. Like, that never happened to Mike McCarthy. And people act like having Aaron Rodgers and now Dak Prescott is again like some problem that well, oh man, like McCarthy sucks. Rodgers carried him. So like that kind of takes me to like the Dak thing is like, the Cowboys have done all these things, and the general consensus is that he sucks or whatever. He's this oaf, that Dak sucks. He's not an elite quarterback. So like, both of those things can't be true. You know what I mean? Like for them to be this consistently good, like, somebody has to be amazing at what they're doing.
Well, and add to the mix the fact that Dan Quinn has had such a profound effect on that defense, right? So, I mean, the Dallas defense is scary, and I know they've had a few hiccups. Like, they've had a few when they're off, right? But but by and large, that's one of the defenses that really causes problems. We talked about the fact that you never thought of Chase Young as like a game wrecker. Montez Sweat isn't really that guy. You've got like 3 of those guys, and you got so the talent acquisition's there, and Dan Quinn his track record speaks for itself, right? So I think the big difference between McCarthy and Green Bay and McCarthy and Dallas is that in Green Bay, they were consistently poor defensively as a team. And so I'm a big Rodgers defender, and I've done all the statistical analysis on, like, when people want to argue about Brady versus Rodgers, all that kind of stuff. I always talk about the number of top 5 and top 10 defenses that Brady had, and the number of top 5 and top defenses that Rodgers had, and it's stark. And so, like, all the quarterbacks in history that have won lots of Super Bowls have done it because they're really, really good, and they've got a really good defense. And so that's what Dallas seems to have now, is they've got a quarterback who, when he's going right, is really good. They've got a ton of offensive weapons, and they've got a really dangerous defense. And so I guess I think that the bar for McCarthy should be high, because I just look at it as an outsider looking in. I'm like, okay, they are so loaded from a player standpoint. They've got, I think, arguably one of the top 2 or 3 defensive coordinators in the league managing that side of the ball. Man, they better win some games, right? Like how do you not, right? I mean, so it's, for me, what's, if we play the what ifs, it's like, well, I don't know, you name whoever you think might be one of the top coaches. You take Kyle Shanahan, or you taking, people have different opinions on him, but take somebody who's regarded as one of the top minds in the NFL right now, and stick them in Dallas. And I wonder what we'd be seeing. Would it be the same results, better, worse? I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. I'll be honest with you, when McCarthy signed, when he was hired by the Cowboys, I was
same cycle as Rivera. Like, it was the same offseason,
awesome.
right?
Yeah, like, this is great. Like, they will be stuck in kind of like this mediocre state, and so it'll be interesting to see if they can get over the hump.
We obviously have a lot of Eagles fans who listen to the show.
Yeah.
So as much as it hurts us both, we have to talk about their team. I guess this is a natural segue. Mike McCarthy or Nick Sirianni, Dak Prescott or Jalen Hurts? Where is Brendan's side on each of these 2 arguments?
Okay, so first of all, Nick Sirianni, there's something about this guy. He has like the most punchable face in the NFL.
I've sang that song many times.
He's mean mugging all the time. Like, I don't want that out of a coach. It's just obnoxious. It's stupid.
I don't mean to interrupt you. He does this thing that I've joked about here. It's a joke that's like completely serious. I feel like nowadays every NFL coach is trying to like establish their wardrobe item. Like Kevin O'Connell wears the t-shirt with long sleeves with a hood. Matt LaFleur wears like a vest. Like, every coach has to have like a distinguishable item of clothing on them. Nick Sirianni forever had a visor that he would clip a highlighter to. And I would always think like that cannot be convenient for you to have the like highlighter, right next to your dimple or whatever. Like, that has to be incredibly annoying. But my take was that I really believe, I still do, that he wanted Eagles fans to be like dressing up as him for Halloween, like walking around with play sheets and highlighters on their visors.
Yeah, exactly. No, he knows he's on camera,
right?
And he plays to the camera, which is, I don't know, whatever.
Good for
I guess,
you, Brendan.
Yeah. So anyway, as to which coach I'd rather have, like, who gives the team a better chance of winning, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to argue with the results that Sirianni's got. I mean, they just played a Super Bowl, right? So I don't know. I might give the nod to Sirianni, as much as I hate to do it.
He's super aggressive, and I really admire that, as much as it hurts to admit.
Prescott versus Hurts, I probably lean Hurts, because it seems like Prescott. So Prescott seems like one of those guys in the NFL. It's kind of like I don't know. There've been a handful of like Eli Manning and various others who are like, you could just tell they're like good guys, just quality. Kirk Cousins,
good humans, right?
Good humans, like just good people, and you want success for them. Putting to the side their team affiliation, you want success from them because they seem like good dudes, and Prescott seems to be that guy, right? So it's hard
Hurts
to
for what it's worth.
Yeah, it hurts likewise. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to root against Prescott, but it does seem like, and I'm sure you could give me some statistics that would argue the contrary, but it seems like he is kind of your front running quarterback. When things are going well, he's going well. And then when the lights get brighter, sometimes, he poops the bed. So it'll be interesting to see again, as this season rolls on, like, I think this is going to be the referendum on Dak Prescott, because everybody expects the Cowboys to make a deep run, and everybody expects it to be essentially. I mean, it's a 4-team race, right? It's Cowboys, Eagles, Lions, and the Niners, and so when they all start butting heads, at the end of the season, the playoffs, be really interesting to see who which of the quarterbacks sort of ascends, and to date in the postseason and in games that really matter, Prescott hasn't done that. But tell me I'm wrong. Am I misremembering, or is that a fair assessment?
No, but I mean, and I don't mean to like explain, or explain everything away or whatever, but the 4 teams you mentioned, Dak's 2 most recent playoff losses have come against one of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Against the Niners at like the peak of their powers. And I know our Eagles listeners get upset when I do this, but like the Eagles they're an amazing team. Like I don't mean to take anything away, but they beat the Daniel Jones, Brian Dable led Giants, who we just bagged on, and then they beat the Christian McCaffrey quarterback Niners.
Oh yeah, the Eagles had maybe the easiest path to the Super Bowl of any team in the history of the world. I mean, tell me I'm wrong.
Like, fans around here, Brendan, respect.
Yeah. Well, I mean, tell me I'm wrong. Like somebody, please. Tell me a team that had an easier path to Super Bowl than the Eagles did last year.
And that's where, like, again, I don't mean to be like Dak is this victim, whatever, but like he had to go through a bit of a different path, so to speak, than Jalen Hurts did last year. And to Hurts' credit, was magnificent in the Super Bowl. The fumble aside, Brock Purdy was magnificent. The Lions obviously weren't in the playoffs, but like you're right. That's we're at the point where like the rubber's about to meet the road on some of these teams, and it's going to be fascinating. And a lot of these teams are going to play each other. The Eagles still have to play the Niners this season, obviously.
Yeah.
The Cowboys have to play the Lions. Cowboys have to play the Eagles again. And that I've been saying it. I said it last week. That Cowboys-Lions game, I mean, Dallas could win that game and clinch Philly home field advantage. I mean, that could, depending on what happens between now and week 17, obviously that could be a real butterfly effect sort of thing. If we've gone extraordinarily long, Brendan, so I have just a few blitz questions for you. But if you had to pick a winner of the NFC East right now on Tuesday, November 14th, who would you pick?
Eagles.
How dare you? Seriously.
Sorry. And by the way, Hurts, just real quick on Hurts, I was not a Hurts believer right out of the gate, and I was totally wrong. Like he's great. Like, I mean, I think he's a top 5 guy without going down the list. And yeah, I mean, he can hurt you so many ways. He's excellent. So yeah, the Eagles are in a good spot. I thought that it was fool's gold at first. I thought that they believed in him more than they should. And I was totally wrong. He's one of the top guys.
And even if he hadn't been, the fact that they got out ahead on the contract, we talked about this in the offseason. It's like the sooner you get that done, the sooner you can get out of it. If it's terrible, if it blows up in your face, whatever. I mean, like they just make sound decisions as a front office, which is super annoying. So you were on Survivor Go Silent. And I tried to verify this, but I believe that was filmed in the summer of 2017. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So I would never be.
No, sorry. So it was filmed in the summer of. You're right. 17. Yep. That's
okay. Right. So I would never be able to play Survivor because I would fold. Like everyone, I'm sure you've met like a million people that are like, oh, I could totally win Survivor, but like they all couldn't. It's a very difficult thing to do. But like, when you think in your mind, like, what would it be like to play? Obviously you did that and then you went and did it. One of the things that gives me great anxiety is like, well, how would I like disconnect myself from like NFL news? You know what I mean?
Right.
for however long it is. So like,
yeah.
And as I understand, Survivor films like, year round. So it's not like you had to miss like, 2 months of the season or something like that. But what was the biggest piece of Washington news you missed? That's what I'm curious about while you were filming Survivor.
Yeah. So at that time, it's okay. Funny thing about Survivor is you have to make up a story when you go on Survivor. Like you can't just tell people I'm going to play Survivor, right? That jeopardizes your spot in the game. So you have to make up a story. And so I had for a long time, I had just switched careers and become a teacher. And so I had to explain to a lot of people, like students and other people, like why I was leaving at the very end of the school year. So I told this really boring and convoluted story about how I had earned this fellowship. I used to be in business, and that it combined like business practices and education. Like I made it so boring and terrible that like nobody would ask follow-up questions.
This is awesome.
But the thing is that I said to people that there was this fellowship and it was in London, right? Like I was going to go study in London for 7 weeks, which happens to be how long you're away. Well, it used to be how long you're away when you left for Survivor. And during that time, there were terrorist attacks in London. And so people like bombs going off in London.
It's
so
obviously not funny, but like, I mean,
no. So people were calling my wife and be like, hey, is Brendan okay? Have you heard from him? Is there, and of course she knew where I was, but so in terms of news, like the news cycle when I was gone, that was a big one. And then, no, it was, I think the Nationals. So the Caps, So the Nationals were going well, the home teams, and then the Capitals. I think that year, I can't remember now if they were in the playoffs. I do remember that. So right after I played on Rick Devon's season, Reem Daly, who was the first one out, and then was on this island where she had to like sit and stew forever. She kept asking, because that was when the Caps won the Stanley Cup. And so she kept asking, like, what's happening? And you get no news, like you get nothing. So even when you get voted out, like you're just disconnected from the world. Like you don't have your phone, you don't have access to the internet or anything. So yeah, you miss out. But thank God, yeah, that would have been tough to be gone during the football season, because like I'm a Washington sports fan, but above all things, like, and it's by a country mile, I'm a football fan.
Yeah, so I was kind of like putting myself in your shoes and thinking the same thing, where like that would be the ideal time to like go do this, because you're like, all sports matter, but like, oh, I missed the ESPYs, oh no, like how will I ever survive type of thing. But if it had been a year later, you would have missed the Kirk Cousins like first season, and I'm not certain how much you cared about that, but like that I imagine was of some level of interest to you. I mean, like that could have been a lot worse, is what I'm saying. Like it was a good year to go play Survivor.
Yeah. I can remember sitting out on the beach, and there's a guy in my season, Sebastian, who is from Florida, but Sebastian just has family roots in like a Maryland suburb of DC, and so he's a big then Redskins, now Commanders fan, and so like we'd sit at night like just talking about like training camp, and because we were filming, so we basically filmed from the end of May until the game ended like a little bit before July 4th. And so, we're just thinking about like, and I'm telling you, like, we're talking about like backup tight ends. We're talking about Logan Paulson. We're talking about like, and it was so cool, because I'm like half a world away and on the beach in Fiji, like thinking about like with half my brain who I'm going to vote out next. And then also like running down whether they're going to keep a fullback on the roster, So yeah, it's kind of crazy.
That is so awesome. So that was, do you remember Washington's first round draft pick that year?
Oh no, who was it?
That was Jonathan Allen.
Oh
so,
yeah.
I mean, like,
end of the first round.
Yeah. Look at what that obviously ultimately kind of yielded. That's so cool. Again, I just, you put some people just think about Survivor and they think about like the, kind of superficial things, but when you care a little bit more, that's certainly what you think about. I also like you played, I know people hate this. Like I'm not in the Survivor community, but I know there's this divide among the new era and the old era and the like shortened time span, whatever. Would you rather play the old era completely with just Rice, like no reward challenges whatsoever, or go through 5 more years of Dan Snyder?
Well, I under any circumstances, I'd take the old era, because I think it probably suits me a little better. So I'd love to go play again. And if I did, I'd actually rather play the old era, the longer game. So the game used to be 39 days. Now it's 26. And yeah, they didn't give you much of anything back in the day, and they give them more now. And I think the more uncomfortable people are, the better for me. So yeah, that's an easy one. I'd play old rules Survivor for sure.
Well, this week, actually, that we're talking, Survivor Auction, the Survivor Auction is returning. So your thoughts on the current season of Survivor in general? Obviously, Caleb was a super likable dude, too likable. It was too obvious. It was just never going to happen for Caleb. I mean, kiss of death when you're that likable that early on.
Yeah. And so there's two things, right? It's like, how likable is he in real life? And then how much of that are they showing? And when like, there was a time like, so the Survivor editors have like, once you played it, you kind of like look at it through the lens of like, okay, what is the edit telling me? So I try to deduce like what's going to happen in the end. Right. And there was a time when like, if you were going to win the game, you'd get this hero's edit the whole way through. Right. But they, I think the editors try to obscure the results more now, because people are just too savvy and they figure it out. Right. Yeah. So like Caleb was so much the golden boy that like you just knew like the wheels were going to have to come off. But yeah, he was awesome, great character, and he was doing a great job out there. And so yeah, it's a good season. I think they've done a really good job in casting by and large over the last handful of seasons. The only problem like this year, as you know, if you watch the show, 2 of the first 4 players voted out. Well, 2 of the first 4 people to go quit the game. And so I don't know whether that speaks to a problem in casting, or if it's just really bad luck, right? And it could just be just a spate of bad luck, and we won't see another person quit for the next decade, right? So hard to say, but that's disappointing, because you want to see people out there that want to be there. But it's good. I mean, I prefer the old times where it was a longer season, because it changes the dynamic and it just changes the game, right? It's a different game. It taxes people differently. They're going to play differently when it's short. And I think Survivor, like production, they want to play up like, oh, it's fast and furious and it's more dangerous now. And I mean, that, whatever. I'm not sure that that's true. I do like this, that one of the best things to come out of this season is because of the right. I think it's because of the writer's strike in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. Like they've got to extend like programming, and they've got to put something on TV, right? So a lot of these reality shows are being shown more because they don't have writers to write scripted shows. And so every episode this season's been an hour and a half. And I think that's like the perfect length. It's awesome because you can really kind of get into a little bit more of what's going on out there and why people are doing the things they're doing. You can sort of build a little bit more tension and more drama. So I think it's been really good in that regard.
Yeah, it's amazing. Even with 90-minute episodes, like there's like just reading like the Survivor subreddit, it still feels like there are things that I wish I would have seen, like conversations I wish I would have seen. Like it's just, if you're into Survivor, you kind of know that like there really truly never is enough. And I believe I saw that next season, the first 2 episodes are both 2-hour episodes before 90-minute episodes.
Yeah, 2-hour episodes where I think they're only voting one person out in each episode. So like my season, we had a 90-minute first episode where we voted out 2 people, and there were all these shenanigans around like sending somebody to Ghost Island, which was a new thing. So like you're packing so much in. And when that happens, like you just can't, like sometimes as a viewer, you're watching Survivor and you're like, why did that person do that? This doesn't make any sense. And sometimes there's like, it's because they're not very good at Survivor, but other times it's because like there's a good reason why they did the things they did. And there's just stuff has to get left out, right? Because if you think about it, like early on in the game, there are a couple days that happen before anyone gets voted out, and everyone's being filmed 24 hours a day, right? So there's so much footage that you're seeing 10% of the action out there, right? And so they've got to simplify plot lines, and it's not because they're trying to like trick the viewer. It's just like, you just can't show everything, right? And so sometimes stuff's going to get left out, and so I think the more you can show of the why and how is the better. So yeah, I've been really happy with it.
I'm with you. Prefer the old era, obviously. Also, like all the advantages are great, but it does get a little overwhelming trying to remember where they're all at. And like this season, especially with the like advanced, even more advanced, advantages that are like you can combine these two, and when one, you know what I mean? Like it's a very tricky. When Jay left, my wife and I were like, okay, well, it was like a domino effect of like, this means like 14 different things now because she's gone, whatever the case may be. It does deliver great moments like Caleb's shot in the dark, obviously. Although the shot in the dark has existed forever.
I think that was the first one to hit, right?
The second, but the first to successfully hit, like successfully save someone that would have been voted out, obviously. And even like, again, I'm a big fan of Devon's. The fire making challenge missed me with that. Like if you win immunity at Final Four, like you deserve to be the most powerful person in the game. Like that's the way Survivor was kind of meant to be played in my mind.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. The reason they did it is they wanted a situation where they wanted to strengthen the final 3 ultimately, right? Is because what happens otherwise is, whoever has the power to vote somebody, to decide who the final 3 are is going to just pick 2 duds. And they wanted to get away from these, like, these blowouts at Final Tribal Council. And so they thought, okay, like if Devins, who no doubt would be voted out, if he can earn his way back in and he's a strong player, well, that's good for the game. So I get why they do it. Like I understand it, but it doesn't always play out, I guess, the way that they intend.
Yeah, I mean, I was bummed for Devins, obviously, but the first one, I believe it was Chrissy, who won the Final Four immunity. And then, Ben, like if you have the proper like character arc, I hate to call it or simplify it that way, but where you are this just like beast at winning things, and then you come in and like save yourself with this final fire making challenge, like it makes it impossible to outdo, because at the very least you should show the jury the Final Four immunity challenge so that they can see like what the person who won, how heroic they were. You know what I'm saying? Like that's an important piece of information in the whole thing.
Although I guess my counter argument would be that the reality of the situation, and I'm only saying this from talking to lots of Survivor people. I was not part of the jury. I got kicked out long before that. But I think that winning challenges and, including the fire making challenge isn't going to win you Survivor. Ultimately, it's relationships that do it. And it all gets back to that. So I think you could put on this great show at Tribal Council and and win Survivor and, you know, pull it out of the fire, so to speak. But like, if you don't have good relationships, if you haven't built that, then you're not going to win. And ultimately, I think it always comes down to that. So like on Ben's season, yeah, I mean, he made a bunch of splashy moves but he also, it often just gets down to who the players hit it off with, who they like, you know, and that's
it's a social game.
It's a social game.
Yeah.
Above all things, it's a social game. And, you know, we could geek out and talk about it for a long time, but there are lots and lots of examples of where the person who won the game was not the greatest challenges, but instead the person that just made the best relationships. And ultimately that's, I think, what it comes down to.
Last one for you, Brendan, and you've already been a hero for how long you've lasted here, outlasted, some would say. I don't know who you picked to win this season of Survivor, so whoever that was, if you did give a winner pick, and if you want to change it, you can do so here.
Yes, I don't know that I gave one this year, but I was talking with my son Will, who's a huge Survivor fan, and Adam Dalton probably knows more about Survivor than anybody else on earth, and he thinks it's going to be either Kelly, the nurse,
yeah. That's my pick,
or Dee. And I can't disagree with him. If I had to put money on one or a couple people, I'd be willing to put a little bit of money on the two of them versus the field at this point.
Yeah, I'm with you. If you give me two teams versus the field, I'm totally in on that. That goes for the NFL as well. I think Kelly's got the same likability as Caleb, but like nobody is as aware of it. She's a little bit more stealth in that sense. So she's dangerous. Brendan Shapiro, you have been incredible. This has been so much fun to talk about the Commanders, to talk about Survivor. Anything else you want to say? Actually, I have one last request. This is the NFC East Mixtape. I didn't prep you for this because I wanted to surprise you. Every week we add a song to an ongoing playlist that we have. And even guests get to add a song. So give us a song to add to the NFC East Mixtape playlist, please.
Oh, gosh.
It doesn't have to be, a lot of people ask, like, it doesn't have to be reflective of like where the Commanders are at in the season. It doesn't have to like personify your feelings for them. It can just be a song you like. It can be anything you want. Except I would prefer if it's accessible on Apple Music, so I can add it to the playlist. That's the only, make sure it's accessible on the most popular music platform in the world, please.
Gotcha. And is this, does it have to be, does it have to like school appropriate? Like, does this have to be?
Nah, we got explicit songs. You're good.
All right.
Yeah.
In that case, we're going to go with, I just heard this the other day. Here it is. I'm looking it up as we speak. Sorry, because it came.
You're fine. I'll buy you some time.
Here it is.
I surprised
you. It's okay, featuring Young Thug. It's actually Busta Rhymes back from the dead. But it's featuring Young Thug. Okay, is that's a good one.
That's a great song. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for the conversation, Brendan. You're the best. I wish you health, wealth, and happiness, but like pure and utter sports misery for obvious reasons.
Feelings mutual. It's been a blast. Anytime.